Okay, let's unpack this. Um, if you think of American history as this giant building, right? And there's a massive corporate ladder inside.
Right, a ladder most people can even get near.
Exactly. Women, for a very long time, they weren't even allowed in the lobby. I mean, they couldn't vote. They were barred from most professions. And their economic rights were just, well, severely restricted.
Yeah, totally.
So they effectively built their own ladder on the outside of the building. And the raw material they used to construct that scaffolding was philanthropy.
Which is just, it completely reframes how we understand the development of American civil society.
It really does.
Because when we look at the historical record, giving wasn't just this polite, weekend hobby for these women. It was actually the primary mechanism they used to access public life.
Which is our mission for this deep dive today.
Yeah.
We are looking at a really fast-getting stack of sources. We've got historical overviews, timelines of women's giving, and this brilliant dissertation focusing specifically on the life of Madam C.J. Walker.
It's a great collection of texts.
Yeah, and we're going to explore how women used philanthropy to, shape society, build these massive institutions, and carve out a public voice long before they had equal access to the economy or the ballot box.
Right, long before they had any formal power.
Exactly. So whether you volunteer in your community or maybe you lead a business looking at corporate social responsibility, or you're just insanely curious about how power actually works behind the scenes, understanding these historical, invisible careers is going to completely change how you view charity today.
Yeah, and that term invisible careers, which was coined by sociologist Arlene Kaplan-Daniels, it's the perfect starting point for us.
Oh, definitely.
Daniels used it to describe the highly skilled yet entirely unpaid labor that women were doing, in fundraising and organization.
Right.
But to understand why those careers remained invisible for so long, we really have to dismantle the biggest myth our sources tackle, which is the Lady Bountiful stereotype.
Right. Okay, so that's the classic image of the passive, wealthy woman handing out alms to the poor from her carriage, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It feels like something straight out of a Dickens novel.
It does. And that image, it actually did a lot of damage historically.
How so?
Well, it trivialized women's work. It made their philanthropy look like a simple extension of their domestic duties, like caring for the sick, feeding the hungry.
So it just looked like they were being good wives and mothers on a broader scale.
Right. It looked safe. It looked polite. But beneath that polite veneer, women were engaging in what historian Kathleen McCarthy calls the creation of parallel power structures.
Wait, so you're telling me the Lady Bountiful image was basically a cover story, like a Trojan horse?
Essentially, yeah.
They looked like they were just doing women's work, but they were actually building massive political and economic infrastructures.
That is the ultimate Trojan horse of the 19th century. Because they were denied political participation, they used these charitable associations to exert immense influence. I mean, we can trace the roots of this all the way back to 1790s with the first female-controlled charities like the Society for the Relief of Poor Women and Children in New York.
Right, early mutual aid stuff.
Exactly. But the true scale of this organizational power, it just explodes during the Civil War.
Oh, the sanitary fairs.
Yeah.
The sources totally blew my mind on this topic.
It's incredible, isn't it?
It is. When you read about the United States Sanitary Commission, these northern female volunteers, they didn't just knit a few socks for the troops. They built logistical networks that spanned the entire Union.
Yeah, they were a powerhouse.
I think the sources said they raised millions of dollars in the 1860s. Millions.
Yeah, they were functioning as nonprofit entrepreneurs on a national scale.
But how did they actually do that? If these women are barred from formal business education and the corporate world, how do they suddenly know how to manage national supply chains and coordinate multi-city fundraising empires?
Well, they scaled up the management skills they were already using in the domestic sphere.
Oh, interesting.
Because running a large 19th century household or a farm, it required intense logistics, budgeting, personnel management.
Right, you're basically running a small village.
Exactly. So during the Civil War, they just applied those skills publicly. They coordinated impromptu art galleries. They developed commercial restaurant services inside these massive temporary pavilions.
Wait, they're running restaurants?
Yeah, full commercial restaurants. And they negotiated freight rates with railroad companies to manage the collection and distribution of donated goods. They were auditing supplies, running PR campaigns, all of it.
They were acting as CEOs of temporary corporations.
Yeah.
It's just incredible. They managed money, they learned leadership skills, and they even lobbied governments.
They absolutely did.
But our sources make a very critical point here about who actually had access to this outside ladder they were building. It was definitely not a universal sisterhood.
Far from it. I mean, we are talking about a deeply segregated society. African American women were routinely excluded from these white-led organizations, both in the North and the South.
So they had to build parallel structures to the parallel structures.
They did, yeah. When white anti-slavery societies excluded them, African American women in New York founded the Manhattan Abolition Society in 1840.
Right.
And their philanthropic focus was distinct. Because they were entirely shut out of mainstream resources, their charitable activities focused heavily on mutual aid, self-help, and education.
Because they had no other option.
Exactly. It was philanthropy as a means of collective survival and liberation.
They were funding their own survival because the formal safety nets simply did not exist for them, which, creates such an interesting pivot in the sources.
Yeah, it does.
Because up to this point in the 19th century, we were mostly looking at women raising money, right?
Yeah.
Like canvassing, pooling small donations, hosting these fairs. But what happens when women finally get control of massive institutional wealth?
Well, the entire methodology of giving undergoes a tectonic shift. You start to see the birth of the modern foundation. And the prime example of this transition is Margaret Olivia Sage.
Also known as Mrs. Russell Sage. She was the widow of the financier Russell Sage. And in 1907, she established the Russell Sage Foundation with a $10 million gift.
Yeah.
$10 million in 1907. I can't even fathom what that translates to today.
It's a staggering amount of capital.
Yeah.
She created one of the very first modern grant-making foundations. But what's fascinating here is, the amount of money is only half the story.
Right.
The real revolution was the mandate she attached to it. Her directive was that the foundation shouldn't just replicate what other charities were doing. She didn't want to just treat the symptoms of poverty, She wanted to locate and eradicate the root causes.
So if we go back to our ladder analogy, instead of just handing food down to the people on the ground, she wanted to fund a structural engineering study to figure out why the ground was sinking in the first place.
That is the perfect way to frame it. This signaled a massive historical shift toward what became known as scientific philanthropy.
Scientific philanthropy.
Right, yeah. The goal was to apply empirical research and social science methods to diagnose social ills.
And the sources detail a really vivid example of this, right? The Pittsburgh Survey, which ran from 1909 to 1914.
Yes.
The foundation basically funded this massive multidisciplinary study of working-class conditions in Pittsburgh.
They sent in a whole team. Sociologists, economists, lawyers, and even pioneering photographers like Lewis Hine.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they didn't just ask people what they needed, they audited an entire American city.
But how does a survey actually lead to tangible change? Because, we see studies get published and ignored all the time today, right? What made this different?
It was the sheer volume of undeniable data. They mapped out typhoid fever cases and correlated them directly to inadequate municipal sanitation.
So they couldn't just ignore it.
Exactly. They tracked the brutal 12-hour shifts and 7-day work weeks in the steel mills. They documented the horrific rate of industrial accidents. By publishing this empirical data, they shocked the public conscience and forced lawmakers' hands. It directly contributed to the establishment of modern zoning laws, better sanitation infrastructure, and even early workers' compensation legislation.
So she used her late husband's millions to build a permanent professional institution where women could wield real data-driven power.
Yes.
Because, and this is key, she intentionally mandated that women hold prominent roles on the foundation's board and its staff.
Right. And by doing that, Sage essentially accelerated the professionalization of social work.
She made it a real career.
She took that unpaid, invisible career of friendly visiting and charity work, and she helped forge it into a credentialed, paid, and highly respected profession. She institutionalized women's power.
She basically built a high-speed elevator on the outside of the building.
Yeah, she really did.
But as powerful as Margaret Olivia Sage was, she represents a very specific demographic, right?
Yeah.
The elite woman who inherited her wealth.
Right, exactly.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Sage did incredible things with the $10 million she inherited. But it makes you wonder, what does this philanthropic power look like when a woman doesn't inherit the wealth?
Yes.
What happens when she creates the wealth from scratch herself, while simultaneously facing the absolute highest barriers of Jim Crow America?
That brings us to the dissertation in our sources, focusing on one of the most remarkable figures in American business history, Madam C.J. Walker.
Born Sarah Breedlove in 1867 on a plantation in Louisiana to parents who had been enslaved.
Yes.
By age 7, she was an orphan. By age 20, she was a widow with a young daughter. She moved to St. Louis and spent years working as a desperately poor washerwoman.
Yeah, incredibly tough circumstances.
And yet she becomes the first self-made female millionaire in America.
Though the sources note her net worth technically peaked just shy of $1 million, but the cultural title stuck because her financial trajectory was so unprecedented.
Right.
But what Tyrone Freeman's dissertation details so beautifully is that her philanthropic identity wasn't formed after she became wealthy.
Oh.
It was forged during those St. Louis years while she was living in abject poverty.
This completely flips the narrative of how we view donors.
Yeah.
Because she wasn't just working in St. Louis. She was taken in and mentored by the women of the St. Paul AME Church's Mite Missionary Society.
Exactly.
And I need to pause here because the term mite is so crucial to understanding this.
It really is. It refers to the biblical story of the widow's mite. The poorest woman in the temple giving 2 small coins, which Jesus declares is a greater gift than the large donations of the rich, because she gave all she had.
So these societies were literally built on the power of pooled pennies.
Yes, pooled pennies.
These were the black club women and church women who formed the backbone of African-American civil society. They provided the social safety net because the state and federal government certainly weren't going to do it for black Americans.
They embraced Sarah Breedlove. They connected her to resources, including a local orphan's home where her daughter Alelia was cared for during the week so Sarah could take in laundry.
Wow.
She experienced firsthand a robust philanthropic infrastructure of black civil society that caught her when she was falling.
And then she transitions. She goes from being a recipient of that charity to becoming a donor herself.
Which raises an important question about how poverty shapes a donor's worldview. For Walker, her philanthropy wasn't born out of a sense of noblesse oblige,
That traditional concept that the wealthy have a noble top-down duty to pity the poor.
Right. Her giving was born out of a moral imagination forged by her own intense suffering.
It's like she learned the exact mechanics of giving while she was on the receiving end. She didn't wait until she was a wealthy CEO to start helping.
No, not at all.
The sources highlight that she gave incrementally. She shared what little she had right from the beginning, dropping her own pennies into the Mite Society collections, which is a totally different mindset than someone writing a check from an ivory tower.
She gave along the way. And as her beauty culture business began to take off, manufacturing specialized hair care products for black women, she didn't leave that grassroots mindset behind. She scaled it up.
She scaled it into a national corporate empire.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the part of the deep dive that should genuinely shock anyone working in modern business today.
Seriously.
Walker didn't just make a fortune and then decide to give a percentage of it away on the side. She basically made philanthropy the organizing principle of her entire business model.
The phrasing Freeman uses in the text is critical here. She pursued commercial and philanthropic goals concurrently.
Concurrently.
Yeah, they were not separate departments. They were the exact same initiative.
First of all, she employed thousands of black women. In the early 1900s, the main jobs available to black women were sharecropping or domestic labor, like the back-breaking laundry work she had done.
Right.
She offered them a completely different path. She created a network of beauty schools and trained them as sales agents.
And we have to define what philanthropy meant in the African-American tradition during this era, because it was far broader than the white mainstream definition of just transferring financial assets.
Okay, so what did it include?
Philanthropy included non-monetary gifts, giving time, providing vocational education, creating dignified jobs, promoting personal hygiene and self-respect, and sharing resources within a community. All of this was recognized as philanthropic action.
So just by hiring these women and giving them a path to financial independence, she was engaging in community philanthropy.
Exactly.
But she went so much further. She organized her national army of sales agents into local clubs, the Madam C.J. Walker Beauty Clubs.
And this is where her brilliance as an organizer really shines. She actually required her agents to do charity work in their local communities as a condition of their association with her brand.
But wait, how do you actually enforce corporate social responsibility on a decentralized independent sales force in the 1910s? There's no email, there's no corporate compliance software.
You do it through culture and competition. Yeah, she leveraged the club structure. She would offer substantial cash prizes to the local clubs that did the most philanthropic work.
Super.
She featured their charitable achievements in her company newsletters. She tied their commercial success and standing within the company directly to their charitable impact in their neighborhoods. And, crucially, she mobilized them for political activism.
The sources mentioned the 1917 convention in Philadelphia, right? The Madam C.J. Walker Hair Culturists Union of America.
Yes.
This was one of the first national meetings of businesswomen in American history.
Yeah.
And they didn't just talk about sales tactics. They sent a telegram to President Woodrow Wilson protesting the epidemic of lynching.
She transformed a sales force into a political pressure group. If we connect this to the bigger picture, her model was highly catalytic.
Catalytic.
She wasn't just giving her own money to institutions, though she
No.
did plenty of that, by the way. She gave heavily to the NAACP, the YMCA, and Black educational institutions like Tuskegee. But more importantly, she was empowering a marginalized community to become philanthropists themselves.
Going back to our analogy, she wasn't just building a ladder for herself. She was handing out blueprints and hammers so thousands of other women could build their own ladders.
Yes. It created a compounding effect of generosity that completely ran counter to the mainstream models of giving of her era.
Which was mostly white men.
Right, exactly. The dominant model was the rich white industrialist, think Andrew Carnegie or John D. Rockefeller, amassing immense wealth, often through pretty ruthless, monopolistic business practices, and then giving it away later in life through massive foundations advised by detached experts.
Right.
Walker, on the other hand, was an African-American woman uplifting her community through the very operation of her business while maintaining direct proximity to the people she was helping.
Though it is worth noting, she did have her own version of that high-level strategic advice.
Yeah.
The sources spend a lot of time on a man named Freeman B. Ransom.
Yes, Freeman B. Ransom. He was her attorney, but his role expanded far beyond legal counsel. He acted as her de facto philanthropic advisor.
Like her own personal foundation director?
Yeah.
Because Rockefeller had Frederick T. Gates to manage his giving. Carnegie had a whole team of secretaries. Walker had Ransom.
Yeah, and he helped her manage the absolute flood of charitable requests she received daily. He investigated the legitimacy of organizations asking for money. He advised her on which causes aligned best with her goals of racial uplift and education, and he helped structure her giving for maximum impact.
Wow.
It demonstrates a level of strategic planning that really rivals any of the famous industrial titans of her day.
And it wasn't just about money for her, even at the very end of her life. The sources mention her will and testament as these fascinating historical social documents.
They are.
She didn't just dump all her wealth into a blind trust. She left specific provisions to ensure her family and friends could have dignified burials, which, given the indignities of the Jim Crow South, that was a massive issue and a traditional focus of Black mutual aid at the time.
Very much so.
And she also left substantial funds to institutions to continue the fight for racial equality long after she was gone.
Her giving was deeply personal, yet infinitely scalable. She managed to blend her identity as a businesswoman, a racewoman, a churchwoman, and a philanthropist into one seamless life.
Wow.
There was no separation between how she made her money and how she used it to empower others.
Let's take a step back and look at the whole picture we've painted today.
Yeah.
We started by tearing down that passive Lady Bountiful myth. We saw how women, historically, used philanthropy as a backdoor to societal power.
Yeah.
They couldn't walk through the front door of politics or formal corporate business, so they built that incredible scaffolding on the outside of the building.
And we saw how that strategy evolved over time, from the localized mutual aid charities of the 1790s to the massive logistical triumphs of the Civil War sanitary fairs, where women essentially ran national supply chains.
Then, when women like Margaret Olivia Sage finally got access to real institutional wealth, they used it to fundamentally change the methodology of giving.
Yeah, shifting to finding the root causes.
Exactly. Moving from treating symptoms to funding scientific research like the Pittsburgh Survey, professionalizing social work, and creating paid, credentialed careers for women.
While simultaneously, women like Madam C.J. Walker were forging entirely new paths outside of inherited wealth. Walker proved that philanthropy could be the very organizing principle of a business, merging entrepreneurship with community uplift, racial solidarity, and grassroots activism.
It really makes you pause. The next time you see a corporate social responsibility campaign from a massive brand or a local volunteer drive organized by a neighborhood group, you aren't just looking at modern marketing or weekend hobbies.
No, not at all.
You are looking at the direct evolution of a survival and empowerment tactic that was pioneered by women who had almost no other avenues for power.
It is a legacy of resilience, logistical brilliance, and strategic imagination that is woven into the very fabric of American civil society.
It really is. But before we wrap up this deep dive, there is one final provocative thought from the Kathleen McCarthy text that I want to leave you with, something for you to mull over.
It's a great question to end on.
We've spent all this time exploring how these women built these incredible community-binding organizations to take care of people because the government wasn't doing it.
Right.
But as the 20th century progressed, social work became highly professionalized, and the modern welfare state eventually stepped in and absorbed many of the social safety net programs that these women's charities used to run.
Yeah, the New Deal and subsequent government programs assumed responsibility for much of what had previously been the exclusive domain of private, female-led charity.
And McCarthy raises this fascinating tension. As that transition happened, did we inadvertently lose something?
Yeah.
Did the rise of the modern welfare state, as absolutely necessary as it was for scale and equity, diminish that incredible community-binding power of grassroots women's philanthropy? Did taking the responsibility away from the neighborhood level and handing it to government bureaucracies weaken the sisterhood and the tight-knit moral imagination that built these movements in the first place?
It's a complex question, and it really reframes how we think about the balance between public welfare and private community action today.
It challenges us to consider what is gained in efficiency and scale versus what might be lost in human connection and local cohesion. Because as we've seen today, that ladder they built on the outside of the building wasn't just a way up for a few exceptional individuals.
Yeah.
It was a scaffold that held entire communities together.